Laughter is one of the most deceptive sounds in any room. It often disguises itself as confidence, but in reality, it is frequently a shield. When people laugh together, they feel protected by numbers, by shared judgment, and by the quiet agreement that someone else has already been placed beneath them. In moments like that, laughter is not harmless. It becomes a verdict. It signals that the room believes it has already decided who matters, who does not, and where power belongs. On this day, the laughter was effortless and careless. It carried no cruelty, no anger, no obvious intent to harm. That was what made it dangerous. Everyone felt certain that the situation was understood, certain that no correction was needed, certain that nothing unexpected could happen next. At the center of that certainty stood Bruce Lee, silent, composed, and completely untouched by the sound surrounding him. He did not react. He did not interrupt. He did not try to reclaim the moment. And that was the instant the balance quietly began to shift. Because the moment they laughed was the moment they stopped paying attention. And the moment they stopped paying attention was the moment they underestimated the wrong person. The laughter that filled the room did not rise from cruelty or hostility. It came from something far more common and far more dangerous: assumption. Assumptions form quickly, often before thought has time to catch up. They are built from surface details that feel obvious and unquestionable, details the mind has learned to trust because they simplify reality. In public spaces especially, people rely on these shortcuts because they reduce uncertainty. The faster a judgment is made, the more certain it feels, even when it is incomplete. Human perception is wired for speed. When someone enters a room, the mind immediately begins sorting, categorizing, and ranking. Size, posture, volume, familiarity, and confidence are processed in seconds. Someone who appears different, smaller, quieter, or unfamiliar is often assigned a lower position without conscious intent. This process does not feel malicious to those doing it. It feels efficient. It feels practical. And because it happens collectively, it rarely feels wrong. In environments shaped by visibility and performance, these judgments solidify even faster. The room rewards what it recognizes and dismisses what it does not. Laughter, in this context, becomes a social signal. It is not just an expression of humor, but a confirmation that the group has reached agreement. When people laugh together, they reassure one another that their interpretation is correct. The laughter says, without words, that no further evaluation is required. In that moment, the laughter served as a conclusion. It closed the door on curiosity. It signaled that the situation had already been assessed and resolved. The room believed it understood what it was seeing, and therefore believed it understood who mattered. That belief brought comfort, because certainty always does. Once a judgment feels settled, the mind relaxes. Attention moves on. This is how dismissal happens quietly. Not through hostility, but through consensus. Not through aggression, but through shared assumption. The laughter was not aimed at causing harm. It was a byproduct of people, trusting what appeared obvious to them. And because it was shared, it felt safe. No one felt responsible for it individually. Responsibility dissolved into the group. At that point, Bruce Lee was no longer perceived as a presence that required engagement. He was reduced to a detail, a background element that did not alter the narrative the room had already accepted. The judgment had been made before he spoke, before he moved, before he had any opportunity to be understood. The room did not feel the need to know more, because it believed it already knew enough. This is one of the most subtle ways people decide who matters. They do it before evidence appears. They do it before interaction occurs. They do it based on familiarity rather than truth. And once the decision is made, everything that follows is filtered through it. Behavior is interpreted to confirm the assumption rather than challenge it. Silence becomes weakness. Calm becomes absence. Presence becomes invisibility. What makes this process especially powerful is that it does not feel intentional. No one announces it. No one claims authority over it. It happens organically, reinforced by glances, reactions, and shared cues. The laughter completes the cycle. It turns assumption into certainty and certainty into closure. Once closed, the mind resists reopening. In that environment, dismissal feels justified. If everyone agrees, then no one feels wrong. If everyone laughs, then no one feels responsible. The room protects itself from doubt by leaning into consensus. and consensus, once established, becomes difficult to question without disrupting the group itself. Yet assumptions built this way are fragile. They rely on limited information and resist deeper understanding. They confuse appearance with substance and familiarity with truth. The room had not evaluated ability, awareness, or discipline. It had evaluated difference. And difference, when misunderstood, is often mistaken for irrelevance. This moment reveals how easily people decide who matters and who does not through careful observation but through convenience. It shows how quickly attention can be withdrawn and how safely dismissal can occur when it is shared. The laughter was not the cause of the judgment. It was the confirmation of it. By the time the sound faded, the room believed it had already moved on. It did not realize that the judgment it had made was incomplete, or that the certainty it relied on was about to be tested, not through confrontation, but through stillness. The assumption felt final. And that is precisely why what followed carried so much weight. This is how people decide who matters. Quickly, quietly, and often incorrectly. Bruce Lee did not interrupt the laughter, not because he accepted it, and not because he was unaffected by it, but because he understood something most people never pause to recognize. Moments like these reveal more than words ever could. When people laugh at someone, they are not just expressing amusement. They are revealing how they measure value, how they decide authority, and how they understand power. Interrupting that process too quickly would have hidden the truth instead of exposing it. Bruce Lee knew that reactions often serve the expectations of others rather than the needs of the moment. If he had corrected the laughter, challenged it, or responded defensively, the room would have shifted its focus to the response rather than the assumption that created the laughter in the first place. The moment would have turned into a debate, a confrontation, or a performance. The underlying belief would have remained untouched. By remaining silent, he allowed that belief to stand fully exposed. As the laughter continued, Bruce Lee observed carefully. His attention was not fixed on the sound itself, but on the behavior behind it. He noticed how easily people laughed when they felt supported by agreement. He noticed how relaxed their posture became once they believed the judgment had already been made. There was no hesitation in their expressions, no awareness of how quickly they had reached certainty. That ease told him everything he needed to know. He also noticed the absence of reflection. Laughter filled the space where self-awareness might have appeared. No one questioned why they were laughing or what assumption they were reinforcing. The confidence behind the laughter came from believing the situation was obvious, and therefore unworthy of deeper consideration. Bruce Lee understood that certainty without reflection is often the most fragile kind of confidence. Instead of reacting, he allowed the moment to unfold naturally. This was not passivity. It was discipline. It required restraint to remain present without interfering. Most people feel an immediate urge to respond when they are judged publicly, either to defend themselves or to reclaim control. Bruce Lee resisted that impulse because he understood that reaction would give the moment more importance than it deserved. By not interrupting, he allowed the room to reveal its own rhythm. He watched how laughter spread, how it peaked, and how it began to lose momentum when it was not reinforced by reaction. He saw how people become careless when they believe they are right, and how that carelessness eventually exposes itself. The longer the laughter continued without resistance, the clearer its emptiness became. Bruce Lee also recognized that power is often misunderstood as the ability to respond immediately. In reality, the ability to wait is far more revealing. Waiting creates space. Space allows behavior to speak for itself. By staying silent, he shifted the burden of meaning back onto those who were laughing. Without his reaction to guide the moment, they were left alone with their own behavior. This choice also protected his internal state. Bruce Lee did not allow the laughter to dictate how he felt or who he needed to be in that moment. His sense of self was not dependent on correcting perception or earning validation. By remaining composed, he maintained control over what mattered most, his awareness. He understood that reacting emotionally would place the situation in control rather than himself. As the laughter continued, Bruce Lee noticed how quickly confidence can turn careless. People laugh more freely when they believe there are no consequences, when they assume the target of their judgment has no authority to challenge it. That assumption creates a false sense of safety. Bruce Lee allowed that safety to exist long enough for it to reveal its weakness. The room, unaware of what was happening internally, believed the moment was still theirs. They thought the laughter had settled the matter. But Bruce Lee understood that the longer he remained still, the more visible the assumptions behind the laughter would become. Silence does not erase behavior. It amplifies it. He did not interrupt because interruption would have shifted attention away from the truth. He did not respond because response would have validated the assumption that he needed to explain himself. Instead, he allowed the moment to run its course, trusting that clarity would emerge without force. This approach requires confidence rooted in self-knowledge. Bruce Lee did not need the room's approval to remain steady. He trusted that awareness outlasts noise, and that certainty built on assumption eventually collapses on its own. By not interrupting, he positioned himself outside the cycle of judgment and reaction. In that stillness, he allowed people to hear themselves. He allowed the laughter to reveal its own limits. And by doing so, he preserved the integrity of the moment, letting it teach its lesson without interference. This is why Bruce Lee did not interrupt the moment. Not because he was indifferent, but because he was attentive. He understood that sometimes the most powerful response is to allow others to fully express their assumptions, because once exposed, those assumptions no longer hold the same power. Laughter is not as strong as it sounds. It feels powerful because it is loud and shared, but it survives only when it is fed. It needs reinforcement from others, confirmation through reaction, and momentum created by response. Without these elements, laughter begins to weaken, no matter how confident it seems at first. In that room, the laughter initially carried certainty. It sounded relaxed, unchallenged, and assured. Yet the moment it was not met with reaction, its foundation began to erode. When Bruce Lee did not respond, the sound subtly changed. It did not stop immediately, but it lost cohesion. What had begun as shared confidence started to feel fragmented. Some people laughed out of habit, others out of uncertainty, and a few simply followed along because stopping felt uncomfortable. The laughter no longer moved together. It lost its rhythm, and rhythm is what gives sound its power. As seconds passed, the laughter grew uneven. It became quieter, less natural, and more forced. People who had laughed easily moments earlier began to hesitate. The confidence that had fueled the sound no longer felt secure because it had not been validated. Without reaction to lean against, the laughter no longer knew where it belonged. It hovered awkwardly in the air, unsupported. Silence did not arrive as a sudden interruption. It crept in gradually, almost unnoticed. A pause appeared where laughter should have continued. A brief moment passed where someone expected another response, but none came. Then, another pause followed. Each gap made the previous sound feel more out of place. The room did not fall silent all at once. It slowed into silence. During this transition, people became aware of themselves in a way they had not been before. Without noise to carry them forward, they began to hear their own laughter as something separate rather than shared. What once felt collective now felt exposed. A few glanced around the room, searching for confirmation that the moment was still acceptable. Others lowered their eyes slightly, sensing that the energy had shifted but unsure why. Without reaction to push against, the moment turned inward. Laughter that had been aimed outward suddenly had nowhere to go. It could not escalate because there was nothing to escalate against. It could not provoke because provocation requires response. What remained was self-awareness, and self-awareness often arrives uninvited when noise fades. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of realization. People began to recognize that the laughter had not been supported by substance. It had relied on assumption and agreement rather than understanding. Without reinforcement, those assumptions stood alone, exposed to quiet scrutiny. The room was no longer participating in a shared judgment. Each person was left to process the moment individually. This is the point where laughter loses its authority. Authority depends on momentum, and momentum depends on participation. When participation stops, authority dissolves. No one had told the room to stop laughing. No one had corrected it. It ended because it could no longer sustain itself. As the silence settled, the room felt heavier, not with tension, but with awareness. The laughter had masked uncertainty, and its absence revealed it. People became conscious of the fact that they had laughed without reflection, and that realization carried weight. What had felt harmless moments earlier now felt incomplete. Bruce Lee remained unchanged throughout this shift. His posture did not alter, and his expression did not react to the silence as it grew. That consistency highlighted the contrast between his steadiness and the room's fluctuation. While the sound had risen and fallen, he had remained constant. This constancy quietly reinforced the imbalance that had begun to emerge. The collapse of the moment did not embarrass anyone openly. It did not humiliate or single out. Instead, it clarified. The laughter had been based on certainty, but that certainty was never examined. Once examined, even briefly, it could not hold. Silence exposed what sound had concealed. This is how moments like this dissolve. Not through confrontation, but through withdrawal of energy. Not through correction, but through lack of reinforcement. The laughter lost its energy because it was no longer being fed. Without reaction to sustain it, it simply ran out of force. What remained after was not hostility or shame, but quiet understanding. The room did not need explanation. The silence had already spoken. It revealed that noise can feel powerful, but only awareness lasts. And in that stillness, everyone present sensed that the moment had shifted in a way that could not be undone. This was the exact instant the laughter lost its power. Not because it was challenged, but because it was allowed to exhaust itself. Silence has a way of revealing what noise carefully hides. When laughter fades and nothing replaces it, the mind no longer has anywhere to escape. In the quiet that followed, people began to notice what they had not questioned moments earlier. Assumptions that had formed quickly and effortlessly now stood exposed, no longer softened by sound or shared reaction. Without laughter to move them forward, everyone was left standing inside their own judgments, aware of how easily those judgments had appeared. The room felt different almost immediately. Not tense in the way conflict feels tense, but weighted, as if the air itself had slowed. Movements became more deliberate. Conversations that might have restarted hesitated before doing so. The atmosphere carried a sense of uncertainty, not because something threatening had happened, but because something familiar had disappeared. Certainty had quietly left the room, and without it, people felt less sure of where they stood. This discomfort did not come from confrontation. It came from reflection. Silence forces attention inward, and inward attention is rarely comfortable when it arrives unexpectedly. People became aware that they had laughed without understanding, and agreed without thinking. That realization did not accuse them, but it unsettled them. The ease they had felt moments earlier was replaced by a subtle awareness that the moment had been misjudged. Without sound to guide them, people began to notice details they had ignored. Body language, stillness, the contrast between movement and calm. In that quiet, the room recalibrated itself. What had once felt obvious now felt incomplete. The assumptions that had supported the laughter no longer felt strong enough to carry meaning on their own. Throughout this shift, Bruce Lee remained exactly the same. His posture did not adjust to the silence, and his expression did not react to the attention now resting more heavily on the space around him. He did not lean into the moment or retreat from it. He simply stayed present, grounded in the same calm he had carried from the beginning. That consistency amplified the discomfort. While the room changed, he did not. While others adjusted internally, he remained steady. This contrast made the silence feel louder than any response could have. It highlighted that nothing was required of him, and that the noise which had preceded the quiet had served no real purpose. The silence revealed that the laughter had been premature. It had arrived before understanding, before awareness, and before reflection. Now, stripped of its momentum, it felt hollow. Not wrong in intention, but empty in substance. People could sense that the moment had moved beyond humor, and that continuing as if nothing had happened would feel dishonest. Silence also removed the protection of the group. Laughter had been shared, which made it feel safe. Quiet made experience individual. Each person was now alone with their thoughts, their assumptions, and their interpretation of what had just unfolded. This individual awareness is often where discomfort lives, because it cannot be diluted by agreement. As the quiet persisted, the room learned something without being told. It learned that sound can conceal uncertainty, and that stillness exposes it. The absence of reaction forced recognition. People did not feel embarrassed because no one was singled out. They felt reflective because the moment had slowed long enough for awareness to catch up. Bruce Lee's unchanged presence became a reference point. His calm was not performative. It did not respond to attention or shift with the mood of the room. That steadiness communicated something without words. It suggested that the silence was not a problem to be solved, but a space to be experienced. In that space, understanding naturally began to form. This is why silence can feel uncomfortable. It removes distraction. It reveals intention. It strips away momentum and leaves only awareness behind. In that gym, silence did not shame anyone, but it clarified something essential. It showed how quickly judgments form and how fragile they become when examined. The room had not been silenced by force. It had quieted because it no longer knew what sound would serve. The laughter had exhausted itself, and no replacement felt appropriate. What remained was a shared recognition that something meaningful had occurred, even if it could not yet be named. The moment completed itself. Not with resolution or explanation, but with understanding. Silence had done what reaction never could. It had allowed truth to surface without resistance, and it had done so simply by staying. This is when silence becomes uncomfortable, not because it threatens, but because it reveals. The shift did not arrive with noise or declaration. There was no moment where someone announced that control had changed hands, and no visible act that signaled a new order. Nothing dramatic marked the transition. Authority simply moved, quietly and unmistakably, as if the room itself had recalibrated its understanding of where certainty truly belonged. The confidence that had once felt secure in shared laughter no longer held the same weight, and without anyone intending it, attention began to settle elsewhere. This movement was subtle, but it was real. Authority slipped away from those who had relied on reaction for reinforcement and settled around the one person who had not needed any reinforcement at all. The people who had laughed earlier had not lost power because they were challenged or corrected. They lost it because the source they depended on had disappeared. Laughter had given them confidence because it echoed. Once the echo faded, there was nothing left to support it. What made this shift so unusual was that it occurred without effort. No one competed for dominance. No one asserted superiority. The usual signals of control were absent. Yet the room felt ordered in a different way, guided by composure rather than volume. The balance changed because people instinctively respond to steadiness when uncertainty appears. When assumptions collapse, the mind looks for something stable to anchor itself to. Throughout this change, Bruce Lee did not move to claim authority. He did not reposition himself, raise his voice, or draw attention to his presence. He remained grounded in the same calm that had been there from the beginning. That groundedness became the new reference point, not because he demanded it, but because it was the only thing in the room that had not shifted. This is how authority truly operates. It is not seized in moments of chaos. It is revealed when chaos dissolves. The laughter had created a temporary sense of order, but that order depended entirely on agreement and reaction. Once reaction stopped, the structure collapsed. What remained was clarity, and clarity naturally gathers attention. Bruce Lee had not taken control of the room. He had done something far more effective. He had removed the illusion that control belonged to anyone else. By refusing to engage in the dynamic that had formed, he exposed how fragile it was. The authority others believed they held existed only as long as it was acknowledged. When acknowledgement disappeared, so did the authority. This revealed a critical distinction. Confidence rooted in reaction needs constant reinforcement. It must be fed by agreement, noise, and response. Without those things, it weakens quickly. Confidence rooted in self-possession does not require external confirmation. It remains intact regardless of attention. Bruce Lee's composure demonstrated this difference without explanation. People in the room sensed this instinctively. They did not analyze it consciously, but they felt it. The presence that felt most reliable was not the loudest or the largest. It was the one that remained unchanged. Authority gravitated toward consistency, because consistency feels safe when certainty dissolves. Without realizing it, the room began to orient itself around calm rather than display. This shift did not diminish anyone. It did not elevate one person at the expense of another. It simply corrected a misunderstanding. Authority was no longer assigned based on reaction or assumption. It was recognized based on stability. That recognition did not need words. It happened quietly, internally, across the room. Bruce Lee's stillness made something clear. Control does not come from directing others. It comes from governing oneself. When someone demonstrates that level of self-command, external control becomes unnecessary. The room adjusts naturally because people respond to coherence, not force. What made this moment enduring was that it could not be undone. Once authority had shifted away from noise and toward composure, Returning to the previous dynamic would have felt artificial. The laughter could not resume because its foundation was gone. The room had moved on, even if no one could articulate exactly how or when it happened. This is why authority shifted without action. It did not require effort because it was never about dominance. It was about alignment. Bruce Lee remained aligned with himself while others relied on reaction to feel secure. When the reaction failed, alignment prevailed. The room did not crown a leader, it recognized one. And recognition, unlike control, does not need to be enforced. It happens naturally when the truth of a situation becomes clear. This is the quiet way authority moves, not through confrontation, but through presence, not through assertion, but through steadiness. And once it settles, it does not need to announce itself to be felt. By the time the room finally settled into silence, the lesson had already passed through everyone present. It did not arrive loudly or demand attention. It arrived quietly, almost unnoticed at first, and that is why it was so effective. The laughter that had filled the space earlier was now clearly revealed for what it was. It had not expressed confidence or strength. It had expressed insecurity disguised as agreement. People had laughed, not because they were certain, but because they felt supported by numbers. The sound had given them comfort, not truth. In the absence of noise, clarity took its place. The silence that followed did not embarrass anyone, or single anyone out. It did not punish or shame. Instead, it clarified something essential that had been hidden beneath the surface. It showed how easily people mistake familiarity for correctness and volume for authority. Without the laughter to mask it, that misunderstanding became visible. As individuals stood in the quiet, they began to recognize how quickly they had participated in something they had not fully understood. They realized that their reaction had been automatic rather than thoughtful. The ease with which they had laughed revealed how much they relied on collective approval to feel certain. That realization was subtle, but it carried weight. It did not accuse them, but it invited reflection. People began to see that noise often feels powerful simply because it fills space. When many voices align, the alignment itself can feel like proof. Yet, alignment without awareness is fragile. Once the sound disappears, nothing remains to support it. What they had taken as strength had depended entirely on reinforcement. Without reinforcement, it dissolved. The silence exposed another truth. Presence does not announce itself. It does not demand recognition or rush to correct misunderstanding. Real authority often waits quietly while others exhaust their energy trying to define it. This understanding emerged slowly, not through explanation, but through contrast. The contrast between the room's shifting reactions and the steady composure of Bruce Lee made the lesson impossible to ignore. People realized too late that true confidence does not need to be shared to feel real. It does not need agreement to survive. It remains intact even when misunderstood. The laughter had required participation to exist. The silence required nothing at all. That difference revealed which state carried more weight. As awareness settled in, individuals recognized how often they equate familiarity with truth. What feels common feels correct. What feels familiar feels safe. Yet familiarity can easily replace understanding when reflection is absent. The moment had revealed how quickly people accept a narrative simply because it aligns with what they already believe. They also understood that authority rooted in reaction is temporary. It lasts only as long as attention supports it. Once attention shifts inward, reaction loses its power. What remains is self-possession, and self-possession does not compete for space. It occupies it naturally. The lesson arrived too late to be dramatic, but early enough to be meaningful. People did not leave the room with a story of confrontation or victory. They left with a deeper awareness of how judgment forms and how easily it can be mistaken for certainty. That awareness stayed with them because it had not been forced upon them. It had emerged on its own. The silence allowed everyone to hear something they usually avoid. It revealed that power is often quieter than expected, and that those who rely on noise often do so because silence would expose them. In contrast, those who are comfortable with silence rarely need to prove anything. This realization did not demand action. It simply settled. People returned to their routines, but with a slightly altered perspective. The room felt familiar again, yet something inside them had shifted. They had seen how easily they could be drawn into agreement without understanding, and how quickly that agreement could unravel when examined. This is what people realized too late. Not that they were wrong to laugh, but that laughter alone had never been evidence of strength. They realized that presence does not rush to announce itself, and that real authority often becomes visible only after others have spent their energy trying to define it. The lesson did not linger because it was shocking. It lingered because it was true. When the moment finally ended, nothing dramatic remained to point at. There was no clear winner, no visible defeat, and no line anyone could quote later. Yet something undeniable had settled into the room. A quiet understanding had replaced certainty, and awareness had taken the place of assumption. What unfolded was not a confrontation, but a correction. Not imposed from outside, but realized from within. What Bruce Lee demonstrated was not superiority, but alignment. He did not need to correct the room because the room corrected itself. By refusing to react, he allowed false confidence to exhaust its own energy and allowed real authority to surface naturally. No one was silenced by force. Silence arrived because nothing false could sustain itself any longer. This is the kind of strength most people overlook. It does not announce itself, compete for attention, or demand agreement. It waits. It observes. And when the noise fades, it remains. In that stillness, truth becomes unavoidable. Assumptions lose their grip, ego loosens, and what is real finally has space to be seen. The lesson of that moment does not belong to one room or one time. It appears wherever people mistake noise for power and familiarity for truth. And it ends the same way every time. Not with conflict, but with clarity. Because when someone is fully grounded, the world around them eventually adjusts. That is what silence reveals in the end. Not weakness, but authority.